Good evening. Thank you, Elise, for joining me again. And Shane, thank you for joining us. We wanted to come together and bring another voice of the adult child who has also gone through some parental alienation and some other things. So, Elise, do you have anything you want to start off with by saying before we get started?
Yeah, I just wanted to welcome Shane as an adult survivor of child parental alienation of the severe category. It's a very, very difficult topic to speak about, and in light that it's nearly Parental Alienation Awareness Day on April the 25th, we're gathering together a whole lot of voices and putting them up on the platforms in the hope that other adult survivors can actually see us, hear us, know that they're not alone, potentially start to feel a bit more normal about what's happened to all of us, have a voice around it, potentially get some help around it, and know that you can come through and we are all here. So thank you so much for joining us, Shane.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So Shane, would you like to give us a little bit of background and history with your story? Would you like to start off with that?
Sure. Okay, so when I was 5, my mother left one day. So there wasn't a divorce, a separation or anything like that. We, I suppose to start a little bit earlier than that, we had moved from Queensland down to Victoria, and we were staying in a caravan park temporarily. And I suppose it's like a trailer park. And so there's an outside ablutions block. And one day around about lunchtime, she said she's going to the toilet, and she never came back. So she just basically left. And we were with our father. So there was 3 of us too. I was the oldest child at about 5, and I think my sister's about 18 months younger than me. My youngest brother would have been possibly 1.5. So there was 3 children under 5, and she left, and our father raised us. So we were in the caravan park for a while, and we basically just were told that she ran away, and that was the story that we told people as we grew up. We didn't know the nuances of the story, and whenever we were asked, we just said, "Oh, our mum ran away."
So you didn't have any recollection of any phone calls or letters or any kind of communication maybe between your parents?
I do recall some visits where so once she left, I think for the rest of that day, and it's difficult because I'm 45 now, so it's a long time ago, 40 years, and I was a 5-year-old, so my impressions are a little bit fun, but we basically just carried on with our lives. I think my younger brother and sister probably were upset or distraught or distressed, but I just carried on like it was another day. It was just a fact of life, and I just carried on. So I've probably been a bit indifferent to a lot of things since then. Yeah, I do have an early recollection. I still think we were living in that caravan park. I have an early recollection of Dad piling all of us kids into the back of a car and driving to a pub somewhere. And I don't know how far we traveled. It was a fair distance, I think. And he was talking to her, trying to convince her to come back. I remember being in the pub. I also remember that she didn't come across and talk to us kids or console us or connect with us in any way. So she basically talked to him, and I remember it being standoffish, and she basically just refused. I remember a pool cue in her hand. I think she was just playing pool, and I think she just continued on with her game and her drinking. And then we came home and back to the caravan, and that was that. That was the only time I recall him trying to get her to come back to the family, I suppose. I think she left and went and lived with her family. See, like I said, we moved from Queensland down to Victoria, and her family were all from Victoria. So that's 2 different states away. It's about 3,000 kilometres. So it's a fair distance. And I think he only agreed to the move, I think, for work reasons, to get employment. And it's not to say that he was basically an alcoholic even from that point on, and was losing jobs all the time, not turning up to work, things like that. So I wouldn't say he was unemployable, but he was getting close to that point where he basically just kept burning his own bridges. So he was an addict even back then.
So you're
So-
5 at this point still? Sorry, Elise.
What?
It's all right.
Say again, please.
You were still about 5 at this stage?
Yeah, I remember being 5. So for those, I don't know how long we stayed there. I do remember that I had a 6th birthday while I was living at the caravan park. So this all occurred within maybe half a year of us moving down from Victoria. And when we first did come down, we stayed in, unfortunately, a caravan in the backyard of her parents' house. And there was just animosity in between her family and him. I don't think they liked him. They didn't accept him. He didn't like them. And they were quite free to argue and belittle each other in front of us and denigrate each other in front of us kids. And I think we were just bundled into the back of a car one night and we just drove for some unknown time. You know, we don't have a sense of time or distance as young kids, and we just ended up at a caravan park. So he must have had some sort of a drunken fight with them and then just said, that's it, we're out of here. And yeah, it turned up at a caravan park, and that's where we lived until she left. So and I don't know whether I don't think he handled things well. He was only around about 33, 34 at the time, and basically an alcoholic, and all of a sudden left with 3 kids. So he basically just spent the time just drinking and giving us very perfunctory levels of, you know, care. So we were fed and we had somewhere dry to sleep. And I think that's about as much as he was able to do at the time, or was willing to do at the time. He forgot my birthday. That's how I remember I had a 6th birthday there. So he basically bundled us into the car one day and drove us to a local Kmart, and I got a cricket bat set. And that's what I remember. I didn't even realize it was my birthday. You know, not even enough to remember that I had a birthday that I've forgotten. Might have even been my 5th birthday. I don't know.
Elise, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, so I know this about you, that your mum was very, very young when she had you. I think she was 15.
My mum was
and
15.
He was quite a lot older. So there's
28.
So she's
28
about
and
20 during this time frame then.
Say again?
She's about 20 during this time frame then?
Yeah, I think she was about 20, 21.
Okay, at that time, yeah.
When she left, she was about 20, 21. So she was really young. And I think she was
she had
trapped.
4 children, right?
4 children by that time. So my youngest sister had died of SIDS, cot death. So I don't think that was handled very well emotionally. They're not very emotionally developed, emotionally intelligent people. And I knew she drank a lot as well, and probably smoked. Oh, she was smoking a lot, cigarettes. I remember that from an early age. And so, you know, I think they tried to get away from Queensland for that reason as well, because that's where she was buried. Moved to Victoria, lived with her family for a while. There was animosity between her side of the family and him, and she ended up leaving, running away, as we were told, and going back to her family and living with them. And there was nothing said, discussed, talked about. It was just one day she walked out and never came back.
Wow.
So he obviously didn't handle it. He was angry. He was bitter. And from that point on, he really had nothing nice to say about her as a person, as an individual, or women in general.
Right.
And Victorian women. So like I said, he's from Queensland. He's very patriotic, I suppose, for Queensland, the state.
Mm-hmm.
She's from Victoria, and he never had anything really nice to say about Victorian women either. I think he collected, or he grouped them all as one sort of identity.
Wow.
And so he would basically any behaviours that were not, I suppose, along his set of morals or behaviours were classed as that's just like a Victorian, or you're just acting like your mother. And he'd say other things like, oh, Victorian women, they just sit around in their bathrobes until like the afternoon. They don't do any housework. They don't know how to clean. And so he would just denigrate women in general. But
that's all you heard a lot of is about women in general, including your mother, is just bad.
Absolutely, yeah.
All bad.
Yeah, so I was raised just by a male who denigrated women in general across the board. And I think that's helped, well, not help, but that's how I was trained and indoctrinated growing up to be an adult male without a woman around, because he never remarried or hooked up again with another woman in a de facto relationship. So I was raised purely by a male who really didn't say very nice things about women in general. He carried this bitterness through for years. He escaped a lot into alcoholism, and our early years were ones where we had to fend for ourselves, and it was just a cycle. We knew that come pension day, because he somehow got himself onto a disability pension, so he never had to look for work. He raised us kids full time, but a lot of that during the early years, he just spent drunk, inebriated, day, middle of the day, early night, whatever. So I remember that we had to at some point cook for ourselves.
I was going to ask who cooked or who took care of you and your siblings.
Well, we were ferals. I'll be truthful. We were feral. We just, you know, we didn't wash our own clothes. Sometimes we didn't turn up to school. We were just like, we left to fend for ourselves during that period. I do remember early age, maybe around about 6 years old, learning how to cook mashed potatoes. That was all I knew how to do. So I could peel potatoes and mash potatoes. And I don't know whether I actually did a lot of that and shared it with the kids. I do remember every now and again, but sometimes I just cook when I was hungry. I just cooked for myself, like a feral. I was hungry, I would cook for myself, and they were younger and they were left to fend for themselves. I remember my sister.
Fast. Really
well, yeah. So I remember her being maybe 4 or so, putting just straight rice in a pot, putting it on the stove and turning it on, and it all turned black and was also starting to fire up. And I just went, oh, she's burnt the rice. And I didn't think she's hungry and I have to cook for her. There are other times though when he would be, let's say sober, temporarily sober, and he would cook and we'd have meals, and he tried to have some sort of a traditional upbringing. So there was like Sunday roasts and things like that. But yeah, that was sometimes very infrequent. We just knew that he just went in stages. He wasn't drunk all the time, but he wasn't sober all the time.
How about the school or your community? Did anybody know what was going on, or did anybody understand what was going on or step in to try and help?
Not at first, but later on, you know, child services or Department of Children's Services, or whatever the institute was called, they did step in at a later stage. So when I was around about 8 or so, we were taken away and put into a home, and we were there for a few months. So, say again?
Only a few months, and then you went back
Only a few.
again?
Yeah. So look, that was based on, I think Dad made a friend who was another male, and this male had access to us children, and at some point this male was living in a say he was boarding, and the woman he was boarding with found photos of him and my sister, who was much younger than, like 18 months younger than me. And then she notified the authorities, and then we were taken away in the middle of the night and put into a children's home. And then there was a court for custody.
This is after the first time. This is another.
This is another time.
Wow.
So yeah, we were put into a home. There was allegations of child molestation, let's call it. And at that point, our mother came back into our lives. So they must have contacted her somehow, found her, and she came back into our lives. So that's sort of stepping forward a few years, and we'll probably come back to that. But it's in those those interval years when she first left and when she came back into our lives that we were really heavily indoctrinated against women in general, and her especially. I remember at some point, and I don't know what the situation was, at some point maybe some authorities had become involved. I don't remember the full story, but some authorities had become involved, and they tried to contact my mother. And I remember that he was going to the local community centre to meet up with her. And I don't remember a lot of that because of the situation where he sat there drunkenly, aggressively describing how he was going to go down to that community centre and kill her.
Oh my goodness.
And so,
before you go on that, we'll get to that
yeah,
in a second, but I know, Elise, you wanted to say something real quick. So
Yeah,
before we get off that topic.
wanted to ask a question. So what is it like for young children being put into this situation, being pulled out of the home and put into your family home and being put into a protective home overnight? What is that experience like for you as a child and for your siblings? What was going on for you, so that anyone listening who works in the courts can understand what it's truly like for a child to have that happen to them?
Good question.
well, okay, so when the police first came into their room, we were asleep. It was at night. We were asleep. We were just basically bundled up. Nothing was explained to us. We had no idea what was going on, but we knew that these were the police, and they had Dad. We were all put into the back seat of a car, a police car, and taken to a police station somewhere. And I remember I remember sitting on one of those hard police benches for hours. It was at night. I was tired. I was falling asleep. I actually clearly remember having dreams where people were throwing copper pennies onto flagstones, cobblestones. That was the dream. And when I woke up, it was them typing away, like that's the recollection I have. And then from there, we got into another car and we went to a place. It was at night. It was dark. There were lights on, but some women put us into some beds and we went to sleep. I woke up in the morning and I didn't remember where I was. It took me a couple of seconds of, disorientation to realize, oh, that's right, last night actually occurred. It wasn't just some weird dream.
And you're about 8? Did you say you were about 8?
I would have been about 8 because I think I had my 9th birthday there. I remember that because when you turn 9, you were able to stay up an extra half an hour later, So I remember having the 9th birthday. But nothing really was explained to us that I can remember. We walked out. There was a lot of other children around. And then we all sat down at the breakfast table. They gave us new clothes. Well, not new clothes, but different clothes, because the clothes that we were probably in pajamas or whatever passed for pajamas at the time. It was like a dormitory. There was communal clothing, and communal showers, and we were put to breakfast. And I think they might have explained it over the intervening day. I just don't remember a lot of that explanation. We were in a new place. My brother and sister were younger than me, so they would have been really distraught. I just took it in stride. This was just a new phase of life. And I suppose as a bit of an aside, later on in many years later, through counselling and so forth, I've talked to one of my psychologists, and she's described me as being affect phobic. So I basically have I don't have high and low emotions. I just basically just cruise and just accept things.
Well, yeah.
But it's made it also difficult to express a lot of joy and a lot of sorrow and grief and things like that.
Yeah. And what I can relate to is the same kind of feeling that a lot of us have, where it's just normal. Like you were commenting, this was just what was happening, and we think it's normal at the time. Yep. So Elise, do you want to talk about what he just described in his emotions?
Yeah, so that's a very, very interesting manifestation to watch, and it's really interesting that it's progressed right through into adulthood as well. So this whole thing is like, how do you cope with that in your adult life? Because this is something that you live with all the time. So how do you go with relationships, and if people pass away and will leave you, like what is that like if a relationship ends, or like, because you are an alienated, you're actually a targeted father yourself. You're not sure to what degree, but you have a daughter yourself that you haven't seen since she was a baby. and she's now 19 or something, like 18 or something. Is that correct?
20.
So
All right. I suppose it's a long story, or a long explanation, long answer. As a child, I was trained to not show a lot of emotions because my dad was an alcoholic and he was violent. Okay, so I remember him taking the strap to us quite a few times, and we would not be sure when that was going to occur. So you sort of learn, or I learned as a coping mechanism to hide your emotions. So if you showed that you're unusually upset by some ruling, whatever it might be, whatever was on the TV, if it wasn't the Muppet Show or Disneyland and you got upset because you wanted to watch a Western, he would get angry. If you laughed at an inappropriate time during one of his drunken, maudlin moments where he was, lamenting the loss of his mother who'd passed away or something like that, I remember us giggling because we were kids and we were just doing something else. And he took the strap to us then because we were disrespecting his mother. You learn to hide those emotions and not express them. It was a survival mechanism. And there was other things going on too. So you didn't want to sort of act all emotional, act depressed, act unhappy, because then people would come in and start to ask questions about,
who were the people?
Teachers, child services, your local doctors, whoever, anyone. We didn't want to draw attention. So I suppose I was aware that the life that we were living wasn't the best life, and I was aware enough to just try to not draw attention from people. So
what were you worried would happen if you did?
Well, I was worried that we'd be taken away from my father, I suppose, because he was told that. He was telling us that was his part of his training, his indoctrination of us, that if you children are naughty, you'll be taken away from me. You'll be put into a home. You'd be separated. You'd have no one. I would never be able to see you again. You'd be taken away from me. If you were misbehaving, you were also then told that was the punishment, or you can go live with your mother, who we didn't know at the time anyway. And we'd only been told bad stories about her. She didn't want us. She ran away one day. Didn't even give us an explanation. So he told us all of those sorts of stories. If we misbehaved, we'd get the strap. So you also learn to hide and lie.
So
we were taught to lie.
Were you allowed to speak about missing your mother? Where is your mother? What's going on with your mother? What happened if you mentioned her?
No. Not that we were told explicitly you're not allowed to do this, but it was just not encouraged.
Or was it what we call a covert rule? It was an unspoken rule within your family that you knew XYZ.
Yeah, I think it's like children very quickly pick up on these sorts of cues. You're going to get punished if you do this, so don't do that. Or lie about it and say it wasn't me, it was her, and your sister would get punished. I did that a couple of times. We just weren't encouraged to ask, where is mum? Why did mum leave? Why can't she come back? Why can't we see her? Because then it'd lead to things like, why do you want to see her? Aren't I good enough? What's wrong with being here with me? And if you don't want to be here, there's the door. You can leave. I'll put you in a home tomorrow.
Right, now we're really, really in the PA stuff now. So this is where it's very, very difficult in court to prove that parental alienation is going on, because this level of insidious cues and covert language is going on in the house, in the home. And I grew up watching this as well. It only took a look to get snapped back. You knew, you don't go there, you don't talk about that. Was that similar to what it was like for you?
I would suppose so, like I said.
Prove.
It wasn't encouraged, but it wasn't discouraged. It just wasn't a topic to discuss. It was just never brought up. It was never, Say again, please.
How about as an instinct? Did you know that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an instinct. It was just something that we didn't talk about, Same as we didn't say, Dad, why do you drink all the time? And why do you hit us when you're drunk?
I'm going to pause real quick right there.
Okay.
Okay, so you were talking about that being more of an instinct, and I think a lot of us kids, when we're kids going through this, that survival, somehow it's in us. So Elise, I'm going to ask you, how do we know? What's this instinct? Where is it coming from?
I think it's like the same way you train a dog. I mean, dogs aren't the brightest when you compare them to humans, but they soon learn to sit, drop, and not eat out of the garbage because you train them. Sometimes it's through physical intervention.
Right.
You know, you restrict your dog, you strap your dog, belt your dog, and children learn also that they don't like getting strapped, and so we don't do certain things.
Yeah.
And physical violence was very common in our childhood. I even remember when I got to about, I think, 12, 13, I turned into a teenager, and he formally sat me down and said, from this point on, now that you're a teenager, I won't be belting you anymore, but you'll be grounded. And I was like, oh, I'd graduated a level of humanity. So
It almost
I'd
sounds like
graduated.
you were given this rite of passage.
Yeah. And that was it. It was like a formal, here you go, here's how you shave. I'll no longer strap you.
Wow.
And yeah, although I think a few times I did go to school with some strap marks on my legs where the belt, whipped around and give me that flick. So, but that was just the thing. It wasn't the strap. It was, his hand.
I like your instinctual answer. And it's also the nature versus nurture argument. So as well. So
yeah, and that's how we just learned there were certain topics. And even if he wasn't hitting, the voice, the yell, the angry voice, we would cringe at that. We would know that that's just not a place to go, and so you learned to not ask certain questions and not do certain behaviors. It's like I said, it's like training any animal. You can train them with love or violence.